Hello and welcome to the France 24 interview. We're at the meeting of G7 finance ministers and central bank governors here in Chantilly, where it's not just governments trying to work out how to make capitalism fairer for all, but also key representatives of civil society. Well, my guest today is Melinda Gates, co-chair of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us here on France 24.
Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. So you've just presented a report into digital financial inclusion for women in Africa at the request of the French G7 presidency. Could you start by telling us what we're talking about when we talk about digital financial inclusion?
Sure. We're talking about that basic mobile phone that we all use these days, having a digital bank account on your phone so you can save $1 a day, $2 a day. If you have someone in your family that goes into the city to work, they can send money back in that digital bank account. So that's basically digital financial services.
And why is it exactly that women have a harder time accessing these sorts of services than men?
Well, it starts sometimes because their husband has a phone and they don't. Or if they have a phone, no one has taught them how to open a digital bank account and use it. And we know it's actually not very difficult to do. We know that millions of women, for instance, in Kenya, where the first mobile money platform was started back in the mid-2000s, that it's very easy for women to do, but we have to teach them how to do it, quite frankly, and then they'll take it up in droves.
And I'm assuming that you've seen firsthand the impact that accessing these sorts of services can have on women.
Absolutely. And what women will tell you quite often when you're in these rural communities in many, many countries in Africa, they first don't have the money to get on the bus to go to the bank. If they do have the money to get on the bus, somebody robs them of it. Or if they make it all the steps through, they get the money, they go on the bus, they get to the bank and they're unwelcomed. Whereas when they can stay in their rural community and they save $1 a day, $2 a day, they will tell you when there's a health emergency in the family, it's up to them to have money to spend on that. Or when it's time for the school fees for their children, their husband and they spend money on that. So if they have a way to save money every single day, then they actually have the money when it's needed.
Now, when France took over the presidency of the G7 earlier this year, it announced that one of its primary goals would be fighting inequality. How exactly does accessing financial digital services make it easier for women to get ahead in their lives?
It's fundamental. So the fact that President Macron was willing to take on this agenda of inequality and put it on the agenda was fundamental. There's a gender component to it, which is when you look at these digital financial services, they are going to naturally reach men, but not necessarily women. And yet, when a woman has a bank account, it is power. Money is power. She will tell you no matter where she lives in the world, whether she's in remote rural India or she's in remote Senegal, she will tell you that if she has money, let's say she buys a bicycle for her oldest son, he looks at her differently. When it's time to buy something in the household and she has money, her husband looks at her differently. When she has money, her mother-in-law looks at her differently. She looks at herself differently. It gives her literally that thing that we call this big word empowerment. Money gives her power in her own household and in her own life. And it starts to change everything for her in terms of what she can accomplish in her life and how she can support her children and her family.
So there's this question of empowerment for individual women, but there's also this idea that helping women access financial services helps the global economy too. It's not just a personal issue.
Absolutely. There's a report by McKinsey that says by 2025, we can bring in, through these emerging economies, $3.7 trillion into the global markets. So when you unlock a digital bank account for women and you start her on that path of empowerment, guess what? She moves from the informal sector into the formal economy. She has money to start a business. She starts a business and she hires employees and she sells her goods. She is adding to the global economy, the economy of her community, her country, and the world. And that's the difference that money can make and a digital bank account can make.
So what exactly are the key ways in which the G7 can help women access these services?
They need to make sure that the right regulations are put in place so that the bank accounts are safe. They're done with the right digital operators. They need to drive, and that will help drive competition in the market. When you drive competition, you get the transaction costs down, so it costs just a cent or two a day to transact, which means everybody will start transacting on it. They have to make sure the interoperability rules are done right so that you can operate your phone system and save between and across borders. Many of these families trade across borders in their own countries. The borders are pretty porous. They need to make sure that there's a digital ID system and that women and men have a digital ID. Today, there's 1 billion people on the world who have no sense of identification, no identification card, no birth certificate. And so we need to bring those people into the system, and then you have to do the specific programming and the research to see how do you actually reach women. But all of those things can be done. We have great models from Southeast Asia of this being done and done at scale. It's starting to scale up in different countries in Africa, but we can use those models to get it to scale faster and to help these emerging economies actually emerge.
Now, you mentioned it just now, the difficulties of some women accessing services because they don't have accepted ID. What are the sorts of solutions you found to that specific problem?
Well, I'll give you an example from Southeast Asia. There's a business there where they are attracting women to become drivers, but women have no birth certificate, certainly no driver's license. So they train them how to get their driver's license, and along the way, the business actually makes sure that she has an identification. They go back and help her get her birth certificate. So they are scaling up their business. They're teaching women not only how to be drivers, but to be entrepreneurs, and they're bringing them into the formal economy and getting them an ID. The business I'm talking about, this is just one in particular in one country in Southeast Asia. They're now spreading to 5 others. They've brought millions of women into the digital economy and into the formal economy. And they're teaching them how to manage their money and grow a business. To me, that's pretty exciting.
Now, you're presenting your report at a time when Facebook is very controversially trying to launch its own digital currency, the Libra. How do you feel about the private sector, companies like Facebook, trying to muscle in on this world of digital financial inclusion? Because that's how they're selling it, Facebook.
Yeah, I think, you're always going to have the private sector being the one that comes up with new innovations. That's good for society in general. But it's really important that governments look at how do you regulate new innovation. And so that was something the G7 finance ministers, I wasn't part of that part of the meeting, but that is exactly the type of piece they should be taking up. But then you have to look at the other piece, which is how is that going to affect the poor right away? And on the things that I'm talking about between now and 2025, whatever type of currency, new currency that you're talking about, no matter who it comes from, it's not going to affect the poor now. So what I'm interested in doing is figuring out how do you take the currencies we have and do the right things to immediately unlock opportunities for the poor. And I'm going to let the governments work out the regulation pieces on the new innovation. And that's why we're here to talk about, okay, how do we make these economies so that we're lifting up everybody? Because the goal in these countries is for them to move from low to middle income to high income, just like South Korea did. And that's their goal, and I want to support it by using the currencies we currently have.
Now, these sorts of initiatives, the initiatives you mentioned a little earlier, do of course rely very heavily on the cooperation of national governments. What do these countries stand to gain, and how enthusiastic are they at the moment about engaging in these sorts of initiatives?
They're quite interested, and many of them are looking at these issues themselves. They're looking at Kenya as the model. It was the first one that had mobile money. It was called M-Pesa, which in Swahili means mobile money. It was because of actually investment from the UK government that was made along with Safaricom, which was a local phone company. They're looking at that model. They're looking at how it spread to Tanzania with different regulations, so the market was more open. There were more competitors. The fees were less for their people. And they're looking at how did they scale up those digital bank accounts quickly so people could use them. And so the African countries are very interested in learning the different models. Also, several of them are on the path to their own digital ID system. They've seen how India's done digital ID and they're learning from that. So some are further along on that path and some are sort of on the middle part of their journey and some are at the beginning. But they're all saying that's a place we want to go because we know it will benefit our citizenry long term.
Okay, so we've talked quite extensively about digital financial inclusion. I know that your foundation is also a key donor to the Global Fund that fights to tackle malaria, tuberculosis, HIV and AIDS. The Global Fund is trying to raise $14 billion before the start of next year. How is that going?
Yeah, so President Macron, as part of his G7 agenda, took up the replenishment, which was fabulous, of the Global Fund because he knows how effective it's been. It's literally saved millions and millions of lives. And so the goal is to raise $14 billion. We have early commitments that are increases from countries like the UK, like France. So we still have a ways to go until the fall when the final commitments are made, but I'm very encouraged about that. And I would say that it's vitally important because one of the things we have to face as a world is there is a very large youth cohort that is coming through the continent of Africa right now. If they grow up healthy, it's an opportunity for them to really emerge into middle-income countries if they're healthy and they're well-educated. Conversely, if they have many bouts of malaria or they have lots of HIV/AIDS spread in their countries, they're going to be left in poverty. And I think we want to take this and use the momentum as an opportunity. So I'm encouraged by the donations that have come in already.
And of course, a huge part of your work into improving health opportunities lies in vaccines. You've pumped hundreds of millions of dollars into improving access to vaccines. This as at the same time in the UK, in France, in Italy, in the US as well. Lots of people are becoming more and more skeptical about vaccines. What do you make of that?
I would say to people we have short memories. And we forget when there was smallpox in our country and how scary that was. We forget when there was polio in our countries, which is in our lifetime. My aunt, who I'm very close to, she has polio and she was paralyzed the rest of her life. But we forget that those vaccines have saved lives. In my own country, smallpox is coming back. And you know what happens to a child who gets smallpox? They're in the intensive care unit. So I don't think any parent wants their kid needlessly in the intensive care unit. And I would say make sure you get the right information, and the right information comes from your pediatrician, not from another parent or the internet.
You heard it there from Melinda Gates. Melinda Gates, co-chair of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us here on France 24.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you very much at home for watching. Do stay tuned here on France 24.
Versailles, the Louvre, Mont Saint-Michel are well-known stars of French heritage. But French genius and France harbours many other hidden treasures. The arts, gastronomy, architecture, as well as nature's wonders. Come along with France 24, discover France's living heritage. From young apprentices to accomplished craftsmen and farmers, to Michelin star sporting chefs, meet these people whose passion for their professions preserve and drive French heritage.
You are here on France 24 and France24.com.